Welcome everyone to another informative episode here. And today I'm going to be talking to something very important that it's not something most people plan on to, but it happens. Today I'm joined by Wes Berger from BTM Lawyers. Wes works extensively in family law and helps clients navigate through separation, divorce, parenting issues, property division, and the legal complexities surrounding homes and finances during major life transition. So thank you for joining me, Wes.
Say, thanks for having me. Happy to be here.
Thank you. So before we dive in, maybe it'll be great if you tell us a little bit about your background and what led you to help people with their separation and family law.
For sure. Background as born and raised in the Lower Mainland here. Grew up in North Delta. I did my university and law school up at UBC. So I've kind of been a Lower Mainland guy my whole life. I started with BTM in early 2017. And for the first number of years, I practiced kind of a broad range of civil litigation, but not really any family law. But it was something that I came to around 2021, and there was just some opportunity to do more of that work at our firm. And I had recently started my own family in 2020. And I think when I had some perspective of what it's like to, have children of your own and to have those big life things happen to you, I think it allowed me to kind of bring a little bit more of my own experience to the table. And since then, I've been, practicing a lot of family law as well. It's a really difficult, but can be very rewarding area.
Yeah, absolutely. And BTM is a very large firm.
Mm-hmm.
You represent one of Tri-Cities and Lower Mainland's major firm here.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
Excellent. And how long have you been with BTM?
I've been practicing there since 2017, so almost 10 years at the firm now. I was lucky enough to join the partnership a few months ago.
Awesome.
And at BTM, we've been serving the Tri-Cities since 1979 now. So, coming up on 50 years in the community. We like to say we can give you the same good quality of legal advice as the downtown firms, but a little bit closer to home here in the Tri-Cities. So.
I didn't even know that they go that far.
That's right. Yeah. So
wow.
We've been in the community for a long time now. And so
it's amazing.
It's nice to have some history.
Yes. And so lucky to have you in the same building that I'm here. So let's dive into the topic, what you're an expert at. Starting off, what are some of the biggest misconceptions people have about divorces in BC?
I think one misconception that people still sometimes come to the process with is the idea that it matters who's at fault or who is responsible for the relationship breaking down. Okay. We have what we call a no-fault separation or divorce process in BC, where sometimes that can be good. Sometimes it does seem a little bit unfair. But at the end of the day, the question of sort of who started it, or, maybe in the context of sometimes, marital infidelity, for example, can be kind of the trigger for a separation. It doesn't really matter who's responsible for those things. The law still looks at, everyone's rights the same. And so, like I said, sometimes that can come as a shock to the person who maybe feels like they're kind of a victim of the circumstances. They're in a separation now through no kind of fault of their own. But I think it can be a helpful thing to learn that it's really, those issues aren't really as important in the eyes of the court. And so it can be, a way to kind of streamline things and make them a little bit less emotional.
So to the law, it doesn't matter who's to be blamed or what happens. It's more of like what the structure and the law procedure is.
Correct. Yeah.
Yeah. Mm-hmm. So you may get a lot of people that will point blame until you just say, we got to follow what the law says.
Exactly. So I think for the most part, if it takes one layer of, sort of complexity out of the matter, that can be helpful.
Yeah. Right. Okay. Very good. At what point of the separation decision should somebody be seeking a lawyer?
I would say as early on in the process as you can, up to and including before a separation formally happens. Okay. But sometimes that will be within someone's control. Or maybe they're in a relationship that has sort of not been going well for a while. and the people can sort of see the writing on the wall that something has to give here. And people sometimes come to me at that preliminary stage to try to figure out a way of approaching the whole conversation around separating as diplomatically as possible. And often both parties see the elephant in the room. It's just a matter of one of them kind of talking about it first. And so if you can come to me beforehand, get some guidance on how to broach the subject, you might be able to do so in a way that avoids, things going off the rails. But other times, issues have cropped up in a way that you didn't really have a time to prepare for it. Things are happening in real time. But, I would say in those cases, it's good to get your questions answered as soon as possible.
Yes.
So sooner rather than later.
You have a consultation time, because the fear most people are with having a discussion early on with lawyers, also the cost that will go on.
Yeah, I think I can't speak to all firms out there, but I think
Yes.
certainly in the family law context, there's a need in a lot of cases to start by just asking as many questions as you might have, and just getting a broader understanding of the landscape of, if I were to move forward with this, what it would look like. I always like to say, when I meet with someone to discuss their family law issue, I probably have some information from them or even some guidance, but not every person needs a lawyer to take on full conduct of their family law matter. But sometimes that has to do with the rest of what's going on in your life. If you have a busy job and, young children, for example, where, handling, filing legal documents and that sort of thing, or even really coming to a full understanding of the process is going to be too daunting, versus someone who just needs a little bit of, pointing in the right direction, and they have the intelligence and kind of the bandwidth to do it in their own life. And so my goal always with those consultations, we charge kind of a flat rate of $500 plus tax to kind of get your initial 60 to 90 minute consultation. And in that, my aim is always to answer all the questions that the people have, and to give them some idea of how I would handle things if they did retain me to assist, but also to equip them, to empower them with enough information that if they feel comfortable doing so, there's some things that they could kind of do on their own.
Okay.
And if someone can have an hour consult with me and leave feeling empowered to handle their own case, that's a win in my books. Like I said, not everyone needs someone handling their case kind of full.
It's kind of like a la carte menu. You give them all the option, and then they can decide. And obviously the nature of complexity of these deal circumstances, that they can have like no involvement, partial involvement, or a full involvement.
Exactly. Yes. It's not a one size fits all approach, because everyone's circumstances are a little bit different. And yeah, it might, it sometimes surprises you. Some people, they're really keen and enthusiastic about kind of representing themselves, and other people just want you to take it on for them. And, either kind of works for me, anything in between.
Okay. So we're going to narrow it down onto the real estate aspect of things. What happens to a house during a divorce?
So again, I'm going to say, it depends, which is a lawyer's favorite line, right? But I think what you're talking about is kind of your typical situation that you might imagine, where you've got, married couple, or maybe they're common law or whatever, but they share a residence.
Yes.
And we would refer to that as the family home, is kind of the shorthand term for that. And as a starting point, in 90% of cases, unless there's some marriage agreement that sets out otherwise, or some kind of unique circumstances, the family home is considered a family asset. And on separation, family assets are divided equally. And so the family home is oftentimes the most valuable family asset to be divided, unless you got a bunch of money in the bank and, cars or other toys or investments and that sort of thing. For most normal families, their family home is their big piece of property. And in most cases, it will need to be divided equally among the parties, which usually involves selling the property. Sometimes one of the other parties has the financial wherewithal to purchase the other parties' interest in the property. And sometimes both are in a financial position to do that. And then there's the question of, well, who does it make more sense, or who is it fair, most fair to keep the property? But yeah, it's in almost every case, one of the, the top line items of how are we going to deal with the property.
Yes. So when you mention as family home, and as the BC audience is quite diversified, a lot of them have come from different countries. There's always a saying that, well, I put this much more, or I did this, and one partner didn't work, and I was the financial breadwinner. Maybe can you elaborate? Why is it 50-50?
I think in a lot of ways, it's for the ease of the process when it comes down to division. It would be so much more difficult if it was necessary to sort of prove some sort of equal contribution to the maintenance of the property.
Okay.
Because oftentimes it's not contributed to equally in any sort of monetary way, but some relationships, the parties have similar incomes, and they do notionally, at the very least, contribute the same amounts to things like the mortgage or the down payment to purchase the property. But other relationships are different. Some spouses are, play that more traditional breadwinner role, while the other one is maybe a full-time parent, or, has some other role. But I think the idea is the law isn't there to judge which of those contributions are more important. And just because one person is during the marriage, contributing more to the monetary aspect of maintaining the family property, that parent who is maybe staying home with the children more, or playing that more of that supportive role in the relationship, it's not fair to assign a lesser value to that contribution. And like I said, unless there's some clear agreement otherwise, the much easier way to look at it is you're free to do it however you want during your relationship, but at the end of it, it's all viewed as a shared family asset.
Makes sense, because the establishment of percentage disproportionately is difficult to determine in the eyes of law.
Yeah, and like I said, somebody can argue that, oh well, we had an agreement that, when we purchased our family property, I put in, an extra $100,000 to the purchase, and I got that money from an inheritance from way before we were ever in a relationship. And when I put that money in, we specifically signed an agreement, or at least we had an agreement between us that $100,000 was going to be, for lack of a better word, protected.
Right.
And so, yes, you're entitled to an equal division of the value, the equity in the property as we're getting separated, but I get that first $100,000 back.
Okay.
And so there can be those arrangements, but if there aren't, it's sort of on the burden on the person who wants to insist upon that type of an exclusion to prove that was what the parties agreed or contemplated in advance.
Yeah.
Versus having the reverse be true, forcing someone to prove that the intention was for everything to be equal. I think we flipped it on its head and say the baseline assumption is that it's all just equal, and I think it's a lot easier and more fair that way.
Yes. Can also be applicable when parents help their children.
Yes.
That they give them a down payment, and obviously it's there, but if in case the children decides to go separate ways, that's based on what you just mentioned, is that too can be a question, just to say, well,
yeah, money from the parents is always a big one. And you'll see it in a lot of cases where these, parents that helped a young couple out, maybe with their first purchase, well, now the relationship has gone sideways, and now the parents have maybe a different view to whether or not they're comfortable, walking away from that money. And it's really about, well, what evidence do you have of the intention of the parties at the time? Because some parents would, if they were giving money to in this scenario, we're talking about a young couple getting their start, is that a gift to the couple? In which case, it's not excluded
Right.
property?
Right.
Or was this a gift to the one child that was very clearly intended to be, kind of not a gift to them collectively?
Okay.
And yeah, I think you get people in kind of on both sides of that where um, that was the intention. The intention was for it to be a gift to just the one child. But they didn't do a good enough job documenting that at the
That
time.
was
And now the other spouse is saying, well, that's not what I remember the deal being. I remember this being a gift to the both of us. And so I'm not going to acknowledge this excluded property claim. And, or, on the flip side of it, where, at the time the gift was given, it was given in good faith to the couple. But now that the relationship has deteriorated, a parent wants to kind of go back on that word, and they're sort of taking the side of their own child, and now they're coming back and claiming that this actually was a gift for the one child, and the spouse who in good faith believed that it was a gift to both of them is now how are they going to be able to prove what the intention was? And so I know it's sort of a separate question, but these are all, it's a good reason to talk to a lawyer when you're purchasing a property like that in circumstances where you're getting some financial assistance, to make sure you've got things properly documented, as between you and the gift givers, so as to avoid, any of these problems. If you're borrowing money by saying it's a gift, sometimes with the mortgage, there's certain requirements. You have to be truthful in all of those conversations. But all the more reason why, it's good to get some legal advice about what you can and should be careful doing in those.
Amazing. So we talked before in regards to if the circumstances are usually either to sell or either spouse buying out on each other. When it's time to sell, and that's the option they have, maybe one cannot qualify on income to buy out the other. Okay, well, we should sell. From a lawyer's point of view, what's the best course of action to make that as effective as possible? Do you recommend having two realtors being involved, or could it be just one realtor? How does that?
That's a really good question. I've seen it done both ways. And it's been my experience that it's way more effective to have one realtor acting, because I've had cases where property is being sold, as part of this type of a proceeding, but one of the parties is less enthusiastic about this, the idea of this property being sold than the other. It's never a surprise that those people in that position insist that they want to have their own realtor representing them. And so then you have one realtor representing the party that really wants the property sold, and the other realtor representing the party that doesn't really want it to be sold. And it's always such a shock, I say tongue in cheek, that the realtor acting for the party that's less enthusiastic about the sale, doesn't really think that it's reasonable to show the property on such short notice, or they're not quite sure about whether it's the right time for a price reduction, or they can find ways to sort of advance that agenda. And I think one of the things as a lawyer that I always think is so great about having clients in a situation like this work with the realtor is the realtor wants to sell the property, right? That's how they get paid, and they're motivated to sell. And so if both parties empower one realtor with one goal, which is to sell the property for as much as they can get for it in as short a time as possible, you can have some great results. Depends on the realtor that you get. If you have one person who's pulling in a clear direction, you have much more confidence that if something isn't going right, it's not because any of the parties are taking any steps to sort of sabotage the proceeding. But when you have two realtors and two differing sets of views as to how to best market and sell this property, you can have disagreement over that. And if you have two different sets of recommendations being made, it's very difficult to really know how to move forward. And so I have had situations where kind of like the third option is where there's just such a fundamental level of distrust that the parties have they can't even agree on picking a realtor together, or there's some assumption that any realtor that you choose is going to be someone who's not looking out for me, and any one that I choose, you're going to be opposed to. What I've had clients do is they each appoint a realtor, And those two realtors talk to each other, and they come up with a third realtor that both of them can live with. And that's a way of sort of ensuring that a properly neutral party is chosen. But I think it's a mistake to have more than one realtor.
Thank you. Aside from is investment homes treated differently?
Yeah, they're all still considered family property. I think the questions around who makes more sense to retain one of those properties or the other in a circumstance where like both of the parties feel they have or have the financial wherewithal to take on the property. Sometimes with the family home, who still gets to stay living in there if it's your primary residence, considerations around if there's children involved and who's going to have primary parenting of the children. Sometimes that will factor into the issue of who, for example, if one parent is going to have primary custody of their children are still school aged, and they've been living in a certain neighborhood their whole life or whatever, it might make more sense for the parent to have them 5 days a week to get the family home so the kids can stay living in there. Right. Whereas if it's a vacation property, those same considerations don't always apply. But in terms of the, how they're divided, it's all those same principles apply.
Okay.
I think sometimes vacation properties, there's more of an obvious argument about excluded property. This is in kind of these scenarios where maybe one of the spouses owns a part of this vacation property that, was owned by their family for generations. Their aunt and uncle used to own this property, but as the older relatives started to pass on and leave that those properties to other people in their family, they kind of came to that ownership and in this way that really had nothing to do with this ever being a family property in any way. And so some of them lend themselves more naturally to discussions around excluded property, but fundamentally, no, there's nothing specifically where they're treated any differently.
Okay. Now, divorces are hard and difficult decisions and phases people go through. From your opinion, what are some of the best way that people can be calm and make smart decisions during this separation process?
Yeah, I mean, that's you hit the nail on the head. It's important to try to the extent possible to approach it, as pragmatically as possible. One of the tricks of doing that, I'd say, would be getting a lawyer involved.
Sure.
I would say 90% of the lawyers that you're going to encounter embrace a similar philosophy that I do, which is we're here to make your conflict less contentious, not more contentious. And we can do that because we know what the law says and we know how it's applied. And we can see the people who have the worst experiences are the ones that fight over every last dime or every last piece of furniture in their home or every last hour with the children. And those are the people that are still fighting about their separation 2 or 3 years after retaining us. And, the biggest thing about that is you can imagine, what that's costing them in terms of legal fees. And so a lot of couples, unfortunately, they end up eroding a lot of their matrimonial assets, just, throwing it all away on legal fees. And so I think most lawyers have a way of cutting through all of that and seeing and telling people, this is how it's probably going to turn out or something quite close to that. And it's better, trying to negotiate a resolution somewhere in that neighborhood than, and getting maybe 80% of what you kind of thought you could achieve through this process and spending maybe 20% of the effort doing that versus spending that extra 80% of effort to get that final 20% of results. It's a perspective that working with a lawyer can bring. I'll say that all knowing very well that it's super easy for me to say, oh, you got to just take the emotion out of it, right? This is the most probably emotional situation that you can be in, especially when you're talking about dealing with kids. The other thing too, right, is if you have young children, what they need are two supportive parents in their life. And that's the biggest argument for approaching it a little bit more collaboratively, because, you might not be partners in marriage anymore, but you're going to still be, co-parents and partners in life for, the next 20 years or so if you've got young children, right? And so you need to figure out a way, if you can, to coexist with this person, because they're not about to stop being a part of your life anytime soon.
The mistakes people make is trying to communicate their emotions by holding a lot of things too prolonged. And what would you be saying the team of professionals, as people are going through divorces, would need? Obviously, lawyers, one of them.
Yeah, a lawyer's starting point for sure. I think as you move through that process, having a good accountant to work with, and certainly, as we mentioned, if you're dealing with, if you've got, family property or real estate that you're going to have to deal with, working with a realtor that you trust is huge as well. In terms of other professionals, I'm a big proponent of counseling. It's obviously, for most people, the most difficult, experience that they're going to have to go through in their life. And there's a lot of emotions that come with that. And having someone that you can talk to and
Right.
help work through some of those things and help you make decisions with proper mental clarity is huge, and I always say, a lawyer isn't a good counselor. I'm
Right.
half as qualified and twice as expensive, and so it's better to connect with a professional that can help you in those areas. But I think beyond that, just, maybe the only other professional that comes to mind is maybe like a good personal trainer to just make sure you're taking care of yourself.
Yes.
And that can be half the battle too, is just feeling good enough to handle the things that get thrown at you.
Absolutely. Excellent. Wes, thank you so much for the discussions and the guidance, and what this information was given to me is good enough for somebody that they just want to have some framework. And then obviously, if they need to kind of reach out to yourself, they're more than welcome to.
Yeah, no, I'm always happy to talk with people. Like I said, people find themselves in a difficult situation. I think every lawyer has a little bit of a different style. Mine, though, has been focused on, how can we improve this situation? And especially with the eye towards the fact of, in most people's cases, they need to have some sort of relationship with this person on an ongoing basis. And you're not going to agree on everything. And sometimes half the battle is just figuring out as quickly as possible those areas that you're just not going to come to an agreement on. So then you can stop arguing about it and ask the courts to assist with resolving those disputes, because, not everything there can't be a compromise on everything. But I think most people benefit from just recognizing what those areas are, and, having if we're going to fight about it, let's just have a fair fight and not have it consume our lives for forever and take up every last dollar that we have.
That's good. Yes. No, it's a very good advice. Absolutely. And we'll always leave your contact for anybody reaching. Firstly, hope not that they're going to get separation.
Absolutely.
But if they do, we know who to reach out to.
Right on.
Thank you so much.
It's my pleasure. Thanks for
Awesome.
having me.
Thank you.